24,000 years ago, humanity was close to extinction. Our ancestors lived on every continent except the Americas. From Australia to Africa, they faced a climate much colder and more volatile than it is today. But it was in Europe that our forebears faced the worst living conditions. Vast ice sheets, up to 2 miles thick, were covering a third of the continent and spreading every day. It was the most extreme climate humans had ever endured. If they were to survive, they would have to abandon their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle and find a whole new way of living. They were well equipped for the challenge. Human ingenuity had evolved over thousands of generations, shaped by the struggle against the elements.
Human beings are unique. We are so versatile that we can deal with almost any challenge. What allows us to do this? Well, it's the force of an evolutionary background of adapting to environmental change.
I think we're learning more and more that the motor of evolution isn't competition and biology and ecology, which is what Darwin thought. The motor of evolution is physics, it's climate, most of all, it's the ice.
For 2.5 million years, we have been living in an ice age. The ebb and flow of ice has dominated our climate, determined our evolution, and changed the way we live. One of nature's most destructive forces, ice, has helped make us who we are today. These hills were once the northern edge of the known world. Beyond lay an empty, frozen wasteland stretching all the way to the Arctic. This was as close to the ice as people dared go. A hunting party is in the area, trying to find food for their families. They've come this far north in search of reindeer, the best source of protein in a frozen climate. They've been successfully hunting in this territory for generations, but this year is different. The big herds haven't shown. Still, a single reindeer could feed them for a week. They don't understand why, but each year the weather's getting worse, and the search for food becomes more desperate.
Givi! And the king had borrowed!
Their families are back at camp, 20 miles further south. In evolutionary terms, these are modern humans. They can make clothes and shelters tough enough to withstand glacial temperatures. And like us, they speak a complex language, but their lifestyle is very different. They live in small clans of around 30 people, taking from the land what they need to survive. For the last 5 years, this clan has been led by its chief, Bron. He owes his status to his physical prowess. He is the strongest member of the group. The hunters return, their sleds almost empty. It's only October, but it's already winter. Without reindeer meat, the clan will struggle to survive the months ahead. They could abandon camp now and travel south in search of food. But to Bron, this seems a drastic move. Heading into the unknown, just as winter is closing in. He decides they'll stay put and trust in the spirits to protect them. His faith is misplaced. The climate was being determined by physical forces beyond their control. Forces which had been unleashed way back in time, long before humans had ever set foot on the planet. 3 million years previously, on the other side of the world, the shifting of continental plates created the Isthmus of Panama. Ocean currents could no longer flow between the Atlantic and Pacific. Warm tropical water was diverted north. At the time, there was no ice at the North Pole. It was cold enough, but the air was too dry for snow to fall. But when warm, wet air from the tropics reached the Arctic, clouds started to form. Snow fell, and an ice sheet began to grow. None of this would have mattered to humans if the ice had stayed restricted to the North Pole. But it didn't. The Earth's orbit isn't stable. Over thousands of years, tiny wobbles changed the amount of sunlight reaching the planet's surface. These wobbles made the northern ice sheets first grow and then melt back again. Since the Ice Age began 2.5 million years ago, they have pulsed back and forth over 30 times. "24,000 years ago, the ice was advancing toward one of its high points, moving south into Europe at up to 60 feet a week. In the hills of southeast England, they're unaware of the ice sheets to the north. But as the temperature drops to 20 below, it becomes clear Bron's decision to stay was a mistake. When it's this cold, they should be eating 3,500 calories a day. They simply don't have the stockpiles of food. The stream, normally full of fish, is frozen solid. They are so desperate that two men are sent out on a hunting mission in the middle of a snowstorm. Bron knows they are unlikely to return. By January, frostbite and hypothermia are taking their toll. People are starting to die. The dead can't be buried. The ground is too hard to dig a grave. In February, the last of the children dies. His mother, Mara, can only grieve. Without children, the clan has no future. The people of Northern Europe are being wiped out by the climate. For 2.5 million years, the Ice Age has played havoc with life on Earth. The idea that the ebb and flow of ice could change the course of evolution was first understood by Charles Darwin. In 1831, he came to these caves and discovered something extraordinary.
And when Darwin was a boy, he used to say he had a hunger for the tropics. And strangely enough, he had the first experience of the tropics here in this rather dank cave in North Wales. What he found was something like this. It's a tooth, and a pretty substantial one. Well, Darwin was a pretty good naturalist, and he recognized straight away that, in fact, it was the tooth of a rhinoceros, which, of course, lived in Africa, and not in Wales. What was it doing here? Well, most people had a very simple explanation. It had been drowned in Noah's flood and washed into this remote Welsh cave.
Darwin had a different theory. What if the tooth hadn't come from Africa at all, but was from a rhino, indigenous to North Wales? His evidence was in the landscape. If rocks and mountains were capable of changing shape over time, perhaps animal life could do the same, and the agent for change was the ice.
When Darwin came here to the heart of Snowdonia, he wrote in his diary that the clues about glaciation in this landscape were as clear as the ruins of a house consumed by fire. And that really was an astonishing change of view. The notion that this landscape wasn't static, it hadn't always been like this. Just a few thousand years earlier, it had been submerged under 1,000 feet of ice. Well, clearly, if you'd been a rhino walking around in North Wales and the climate changed, it changed very quickly, really you had no choice. You had to move, and I'm sure many of them did. They fled southwards, or you died. Faced with the ice, you could do nothing about it. If you look at the fossil record of all kinds of creatures, mammals, ourselves included, it's clear that for huge periods of time, hundreds of thousands of years sometimes, not much seems to happen. But then suddenly things begin to change. And And I think we're learning more and more that the motor of evolution isn't competition in biology and ecology, which is what Darwin thought. The motor of evolution is physics, it's climate, most of all, it's the ice.
"24,000 years ago, humans were trying to avoid the same fate as the Welsh rhinos. One of the hunters, Aki, and his woman, Mara, are leaving. The rest of their family is dead, including their own son. The only other member of the clan to survive is the chief, Bron. It was his decision to stay that's cost so many lives.
Bron, give in again.
They have no choice but to move on, because just the three of them can't hunt large animals. While the weather's relatively mild, they can live off smaller prey, berries and roots. But when next winter comes, they won't survive if they're still alone. Aki, Mara, and Bron are trying to reach their nearest neighbors, a clan they meet up with from time to time and have even exchanged members with in the past. Their camp is 100 miles further east, but progress is painfully slow. Although it's March and the worst of the winter is over, snow is on the ground for at least 7 months a year. They've walked for a week, only to find a deserted camp. Now they are truly alone. There's no point in turning back. They can only go on into unknown territory with one aim: survival. They're heading south into a large valley, a valley that today is underwater at the bottom of the North Sea. 24,000 years ago, so much of the planet's water was trapped in the ice sheets that sea levels were 350 feet lower than today. The travelers are able to walk from Britain all the way to mainland Europe. Aki, Mara, and Bron understand enough about navigation to head away from the ice and in the general direction of the midday sun. But each day they need food and water. It makes sense to stay with the river, even if it takes them off course.
Vegan Berivian Zingan. Gengan Bron. You Gavadiad. Vinganian Henvis. Henvis.
Gavinjam Bron.
Mara and Aki believe that Bron has forfeited his right to act as their leader. His physical strength now seems irrelevant. Their chances of survival will depend less on brute force and more on intelligence. The human brain has always been the key to the success of our species. It evolved in response to 2.5 million years of an ice age climate. Not here in Europe, but on the other side of the world, in our ancestral homeland, Africa. Before the Ice Age began, our earliest ancestors were confined to the lush African rainforests. They lived among these trees, more ape than human.
3 million years ago, this is what we would have looked like. This is one of our earliest ancestors, and it's called an Australopithecine. They had a brain size that is about a third of the brain size of modern humans. It was about the same size in relation to their bodies as we see in modern chimpanzees. So they weren't stupid, but they didn't have the cognitive, the brain specialties that we have as modern humans.
Once the Ice Age started, the climate of Africa was transformed by the pulsing ice sheets. They never reached this far south, but were absorbing so much of the world's moisture, the entire continent became more arid. The great African forests were disappearing, replaced by open savanna land. At the same time, evolution took a decisive step. By about 2 million years ago, a new creature was walking the savanna, Homo ergaster, the first of our ancestors we can really call human.
Homo ergaster would have been quite tall, long legs, and more importantly, he had a brain size that was twice the size of the Australopithecines. Now, this brain allowed him to live in an entirely different environment. Homo ergaster was at home in the open country savanna, and he had to use this brain in order to survive. In the forest, they could have just simply run up a tree to protect themselves from predators. In the savanna here, they wouldn't have had that option. Other animals on the savanna are bigger, have sharper teeth, stronger, and the only thing they would have had to help themselves is their intelligence. It really is remarkable to think that in 3 million years, as the result of the ice sheets in the north, our ancestors have gone from creatures with relatively small brain sizes to ourselves with the large brains that really define modern humans. Other animals have, of course, changed during this time period, but it's only humans that have trebled our brain size.
Angry.
Compared to other creatures, humans have an enormous brain. It uses up 20% of all our energy, 7 times more than the brains of most mammals. But it is this big brain that allows us to survive in the most extreme conditions. Bron is able to turn a few twigs and sinew into an impromptu trap. And in spite of the weather, Aki can use 2 pieces of wood to make a fire. With night on the way, a fire is essential, not just for keeping them warm. It's also their best protection against predators. Despite the cold, Europe at the time was home to packs of hyenas and even lions.
Engasuban Gan! Ganyan! Engasuban Gan! Engasuban Gan! Tu Najan! Najan tu!
This time, they drive off the danger. But as long as the 3 of them are alone, they remain vulnerable. Aki, Mara, and Bron are coping well in unfamiliar territory. Their intelligence allows them to find ways to continue their regular routines. Aki has made a flint sharp enough to use as a razor. A beard can be a liability in a cold climate. It retains moisture and can freeze up when temperatures drop too low.
Mara! Skyman carry! Ingen!
Breakfast comes courtesy of Bron's trapping skills. Hares were common throughout Ice Age Europe. Because there's water, shelter, and plenty of food, it's tempting to break their journey and stay here for a few days.
Eat the Kenyan!
But if they're ever going to make contact with other people, they need to keep moving. In Europe 24,000 years ago, there were 100 square miles of land for every human being. Now that signs of spring have arrived, the travelers have the best chance of finding others. They've covered 600 miles since they left England and have reached the northern plains of Germany. It's May, and temperatures are finally creeping up above freezing. As the snow melts, the rivers become swollen. Mara, Aki, and Bron aren't used to water running this fast. But they're using their intelligence creatively and turning the river to their advantage. They've never made a raft before, but they've seen wood float, and as a hunter, Aki has made timber sleds strong enough to carry reindeer carcasses. They're taking a big risk. If the raft capsizes, they'll drown. Any river or lake they've known has always been too cold for them to learn to swim. But the risk is worth taking. The river will carry them downstream much faster than they can ever walk. This is the real value of human intelligence, our ability to cope with unfamiliar situations and invent new solutions. Dealing with change has become a way of life for our species because we evolved in such a volatile climate. Scientists are only beginning to understand just how rapidly climate has changed over the past 2.5 million years. Within the warm and cold phases of the Ice Age, there have been many shorter and wilder fluctuations capable of transforming landscapes. This basin has gone from savanna to deep lake and then back to savanna on at least 30 occasions. Sometimes over centuries, sometimes only decades. And animal life of all sorts has had to adapt to such rapid change.
We're familiar with the idea that evolution can create specialists, animals that are adapted to eating a certain kind of food or adapted to a certain kind of climate. And that's fine, but it only works up to the point when the environment changes. No environment is permanent. A landscape can exist for maybe tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, but then things change, and sometimes abruptly. In a history of environments that is so volatile and unstable, what that does is it favors the generalists, the evolution of generalists, animals that are much more versatile. You may think of a giraffe as being a specialist with its long neck only capable of eating the leaves off of the tops of the trees. But in fact, a giraffe's neck makes the giraffe a very versatile animal. During a drought, for example, when the trees are dying off, it can stretch its neck downward and eat the grass on the ground. And during good times, it can eat the leaves on the tops of the trees. And so in a situation of vast environmental change, a giraffe can adapt. After some time of studying the demise of the specialists and the rise of the generalists, it dawned on me that this is the story of human evolution, a story of the advantage of being versatile. Take, for example, these hand axes. You can do a lot of things with these tools. You can cut open a large animal's carcass. You could dig in the ground to get out plants or tubers. You could whittle a piece of wood into a spear to kill something. And in a sense, that's the human story. It's the versatility that allows us to spread to new environments, to modify our surroundings in order to cope better when the environment changes. And in this way, human beings are unique. We are so versatile that we can deal with almost any challenge. When things change, we are simply able to cope better than any other organism.
Aki, Mara, and Bron have been traveling through Europe for over 2 months and are now in southern Germany. All that time, they've been looking for other people. Now, their search is over. They're no longer alone. But having come this far, Bron is uncertain. It's always risky making contact with strangers. Aki believes they have no choice. By offering gifts, they'll show they mean no harm. In Ice Age Europe, a meeting between strangers would have been incredibly rare. They'll have to overcome a language barrier.
Hirivergo dochu dungungengyan.
Kvi nikiniti, Yelvan.
Hidi zuns livjad. Hidi.
Nashkum. Nashkum.
Their gifts serve their purpose. But Mara, a healthy woman of childbearing age, is of greater interest. In Ice Age Europe, women were valued far more than men. as the travelers will soon find out. This is no ordinary camp. It's what archaeologists call an aggregation, a temporary meeting of local clans. Such meetings were common in Ice Age Europe, increasingly so as the climate worsened. Each clan sends a few members who spend several weeks together, sharing ideas, skills, and artifacts, anything which can help in the struggle for survival. The aggregation serves the same purpose as a modern trade convention, a showcase for the latest innovations. Making jewelry may seem trivial, but gifts and trinkets were important currency for creating ties between people. In an uncertain world, it's always useful to get along with your neighbors. Bron and Aki have befriended some of the men of the aggregation. They're being shown a new way of throwing spears using a wooden launcher. Being sociable has always been fundamental to human survival. It was hardwired into the brain during the course of our evolution. Scientists know that sociability is innate in humans because they can observe the same behavior in our primate cousins. Genetically, we're closest to chimpanzees, but in other ways, baboons are more similar. They've made this same evolutionary journey as us, from forest to open land, and like us, they crave company.
Just like human beings, baboons are widespread, versatile, intelligent, and quintessentially social animals. Relative to other monkeys, baboons have very large brains for their body size, and there are good reasons for thinking that this is totally linked up with the fact that they live in such large and complex social groups. Because if you live in a complex social group, you've got to keep track all the time of what everyone else in that group is doing, what relationships they have to you, who's mating with whom, who's got a higher rank or a lower rank than yourself. So you're keeping track of really complex dynamic information about all these other individuals. And it's perhaps not surprising, therefore, that drives the need to have more computing power in the brain.
Baboons have a larger neocortex than most species of monkey because they're more sociable. Living in a group has changed their biology. It has made them more intelligent. It has also allowed them to spread across the continent. Baboons are the most successful, versatile monkey in Africa, always moving as a pack to spread their risks. And what's true for baboons was probably also true for early humans.
Coming out onto the savannah, our ancestors must have faced very severe problems in evolutionary terms, in quite the same way that the baboons do. A dangerous, open, very patchy environment where there are resources, but they're spread out in an unpredictable way, and you can't rely on them from season to season. And it's likely that, just like the baboons, they solve this problem through the social groups they lived in.
In Ice Age Europe, being sociable isn't a choice, it's a necessity. Individuals have no long-term future. They have to become part of a group. Mara and the others are trying to charm their hosts. The aggregation will be ending soon, and they want to be adopted permanently by one of the groups.
Zinjiban, Jiban! Akum! Vuzit! Ikum vuzit! Ikum vuzit! Ikum vuzit! Ikum vuzit!
While the weather is good and food plentiful, the visitors are welcome. But with the prospect of another bad winter ahead, none of the clans will find it easy to absorb 3 new members. The only person with any long-term value to them is Mara. The chief wants her to join him and become his woman. Mara knows she'd gain from this arrangement, but without her, Aki and Bron would find it even harder to be accepted by any other clan.
Gabariti! Vin! Kuvoenit! Ako hibot! Ako fukot! Hini ruli!
Enka!
Kenya!
Mara has made her choice. The travelers have no future here.
This is a god.
Aki, Bron, and Mara are leaving before dawn, stealing as much food as they can carry. Once again, they're having to journey into the unknown. They're heading south again and climbing back above the snow line. It's only August, but already the temperature is dropping. For the 2nd year in a row, winter is coming early. The climate has taken a very definite downturn. Scientists know what the weather was like 24,000 years ago by examining cores of ice drilled from deep beneath the world's oldest ice sheets. These are the crown jewels of climate science, each of them a physical relic of a bygone era.
This ice was once snow that fell 24,000 years ago. And each layer you see here is another year's worth of snow compacted into ice and preserved for us to read as the climate record. Ice contains the air that was in the atmosphere at that time. It contains the chemistry of the atmosphere at that time. These layers are the pages of a book. And this particular chapter, 24,000 years ago, was a time when life was very difficult, far more difficult than we have it today. Today, we can depend on having a certain summertime temperature, certain wintertime temperatures that don't deviate very broadly. 24,000 years ago, they didn't have that luxury. Almost on a year-by-year and certainly a decade-by-decade basis, climate was changing very abruptly and by large amounts. Enough that it would be like moving from, say, Paris to Moscow in a matter of a few years.
The variability in the climate was being caused by disruption to the Gulf Stream. This current is the world's most powerful convector system, bringing warm tropical water north and keeping temperatures in Europe at least 15 degrees higher than they'd otherwise been. But scientists believe the Gulf Stream is inherently unstable and can shut down if there's an influx of too much cold, fresh water.
When we put fresh water on the surface of the ocean, we make it difficult for the ocean to circulate in the way that we're familiar with. Where does fresh water come from? Icebergs. Here we have a situation where the North Atlantic region is surrounded by large ice sheets, constantly calving icebergs into this system. This is a situation that you can imagine is simply perfect for a very unstable Gulf Stream, and importantly, if you were living 24,000 years ago, a very unstable climate.
Human life was as unstable as the climate. With the temperatures dropping fast, Bron, Mara, and Aki will only survive another couple of months unless they can find people who are willing to share resources with them. At the aggregation, they heard talk of a land 3 weeks away with great forests and plenty of food. A land we know as Italy. But to get there, they'll have to cross the Alps. At this time, the glaciers of the Alps covered 50,000 square miles, over 40 times their size today. For Mara, Aki, and Bron, their entire lives have been a struggle for survival against the destructive power of ice. But they've never seen that power for themselves until now. For the first time, they have come face to face with an ice sheet.
And Gongiku.
They're looking for a pass that skirts the mountains. But the glaciers move so fast, the landscape is constantly being redrawn, and passes disappear.
Kiwi! Kiwi and Galasianch!
Kuvagi Angiane! Kuvagi Angiane!
Ah, Bibian!
The people of Ice Age Europe were biologically equipped to survive the demands of almost every climate And yet this wasn't enough. If they were to avoid extinction, our ancestors would have to abandon their hunter-gatherer lifestyle and create a more advanced society than had ever existed before. Bron, Mara, and Aki have been traveling for 4 months. Their journey south has been blocked by the ice of the Alps. Now they're heading east into modern-day Austria. Europe at the time was so barren and empty that there were fewer humans than there are chimps or gorillas today, species we regard as endangered. With population levels so low, each new life is highly valued. Mara is 2 months pregnant. The news is welcomed by Bron and Aki, the child's father. But traveling with a pregnant woman is going to make their journey even more difficult. They urgently need to find other people. Their experience of the aggregation has taught them not to expect too much from strangers. As the climate's gotten worse, clans have become more insular. Bands of hunters are competing for the same resources, jealously guarding what little they have. In Ice Age Europe, people knew no other way to live than this. For hunter-gatherers, territory was everything. Today, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle has all but disappeared. The Hadza are one of the most traditional tribes in the world. Living in small, family-based groups, they rely each day on whatever animals the men manage to hunt and whatever roots the women manage to gather. They eat what they find. There's no concept of stockpiling food in case of shortages.
It's very easy to look at hunter-gatherer societies, which are so rare. Nowadays, they make up less than 0.1% of the world's population, and think this is something kind of backward or unusual. But in fact, we've got to remember that all over the world, this is what humankind has done for 90% of its history. And actually, it makes perfectly good sense. It's a very rational way of living. People can feed themselves very well on a relatively small amount of sort of hours work per day. However, it's not always like that. It depends very heavily on the local ecology. And of course, there's always a risk that things go from being relatively abundant one week to very difficult the next week. And when that happens, you've got absolutely no fallback because there's no stored food, no real resources you can turn to. And so you can't support many people in a small area. Groups never get too big. They never reach 100, 200, 300 people together. And looking at hunter-gatherer societies across the world, you often find the compromise of around 30 people. That's the number of people you can usually sustain in one camp before the group gets too big and unwieldy.
Anthropologists think this is probably the scale at which humans lived for over 100,000 years, in hunter-gatherer groups which never grew larger than 30.
For most of human existence, it doesn't seem that anyone anywhere passed the level of living in very small hunter-gatherer bands, but maybe there was no incentive to do that, because when the living is good, it's a perfectly good way of living. Perhaps it's only when worsening circumstances push you into a corner that you have to find another way out.
In Ice Age Europe, there were resources available, but they were beyond the grasp of hunter-gatherers. Aki, Bron, and Mara have heard stories of mammoths, but they've never seen one before. They were rare in the northern hills. Archaeologists believe that mammoths were too dangerous for our ancestors to hunt. Instead, they'd have scavenged the carcasses of any that died naturally. The travelers can do nothing but walk by a wonderful source of food. Aki, Mara, and Bron have eaten barely anything in the last week. They're facing starvation.
Skyman! Wundgott!
But when they do find food, they need to be careful. In their own land, they knew what to eat and what to avoid. Here, the tasting of an unfamiliar mushroom is an act of faith. They should try just a small piece and wait to see their reaction to it. But Aki's hunger overrides his sense of caution. Since leaving their camp, the three travelers have covered over 1,000 miles and reached the modern-day Czech Republic. But they won't be able to go much further. The mushrooms have given Aki food poisoning. Mara is powerless to help him. They've run out of options. They're exhausted, lost and alone. Or so they think. For several hours, a hunting party has been tracking them, keeping their distance. But now, they're taking advantage of Aki's sickness to move in.
Hey, go, go. Vermijden toe. Vermijden toe. Vermijden toe. Good job. Good job. Good job.
The three travelers are being taken away. They don't know where or why. They have little option but to give in to their captors and await their fate. Bron, Mara, and Aki are being taken to a camp. But it's unlike any camp they've ever known. They are used to temporary sites of 3 or 4 teepees. By comparison, this is a city. The 3 travelers have been brought to a valley in Moravia in Central Europe, to the first permanent settlement in human history. Today, the same wide valley betrays no sign of its past. Vineyards have been planted here at Dolny Vestonica and at Pavlov, 2 of the most important Ice Age settlements in Europe. They were first discovered in the 1920s, but their significance has only recently been appreciated.
What's important about these Moravian sites, what makes them far more than just another site, is that they give us very early signs of people settling permanently. These places were settlements. They weren't just temporary camps used once and then people were off and never to return. We have some evidence that mammoth bones were actually stuck together with wet clay, which may suggest that they were kind of bricks, if you want, for the people of the time. So the people were building something that they wanted to come back to. This was an investment they were making in the same way that a homeowner today invests in what they consider to be their permanent home. There's also evidence of hearths and the fact that people were reusing hearths in the same area. And this was not just a group of fly-by-nights, they were digging in.
Other finds at Dolny Vestonica have confirmed the existence of a society more advanced than any other at the time.
What has been found in the Moravian sites is the earliest evidence from anywhere in the world for ceramic technology. Not in the form of pottery, but in the form of art, making figurines that have been fired. And this suggests that people had time, because if you're traveling less, then you have more time to develop and refine your artistic systems. Some people even describe Dolní Věstonice as the New York of the Ice Age, simply because it's the cutting edge of settled life at the time.
Sicilian. Sicilian.
Bron has been brought before the chief and elders of the community. In his clan, he was a chief himself. Here, he's just a refugee, asking for help. There's no reason to expect any better treatment from these people than from the clans of the aggregation or the hunters who chase the travelers off their territory. And without a common language, it's almost impossible for Bron to argue why he and the others should be allowed to stay.
Engongi, Vungud, Vungud Zohu, Vungud, 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 Vungud.
But there's something different about this community, as Mara and Aki are finding out.
Zanid, yada, zanid. Zanid, yada, zanid.
Aki has been delivered into the care of the medicine woman. She's also the spiritual leader of the community. She's going to such lengths to help a stranger because these are people with a totally new approach to outsiders. Facing a hostile climate, they believe their chances of survival are improved by increasing numbers, not restricting them. The size of the community varies throughout the year, but at peak times there are over 100 people living here, well beyond the normal limit of 30 for a hunter-gatherer group. Strangers are seen as a potential asset rather than a threat. Aki has recovered. He and Bron are learning that this settlement isn't just larger than anything they've known before. There's also something different about the way the people here organize their work. In Aki and Bron's hunter-gatherer clan, everyone had a hand in almost every activity. Here, people seem to have been allocated specific tasks. As different tasks are divided up among different people, experts have emerged, individuals with specific skills. They have become much more efficient at what they do. Each year, they are able to make improvements. Tools get sharper, clothes warmer, and huts stronger. They can cope with the deteriorating climate and grow in numbers. And a culture of specialists has started to take root. Within the archaeological record of the Stone Age, it is possible to see a distinct change in this sort of spearheads that were being made in Europe around 24,000 years ago. They are becoming much more elaborate and standardized, as if they were crafted by experts, people dedicated to the task of tool making.
It's amazing to think that this stone spear tip is 24,000 years old. Somebody sat under a rock shelter such as this and thought very carefully about how to make it. It's made on a very thin blade, very long elongated flake, which is very difficult to remove from a core of flint, and then it's received very careful regularisation. The skill required to make something like this indicates that a degree of specialism had emerged. In other words, there were individuals whose skills were to make stone tools. And before this time, the stone tools are very generalised. They're the sort of things that could have been made by many people. So really, tools like this, the gravette point, mark a revolution that had occurred in society about this time.
In France, some enthusiasts still make spearheads as they would have been made in Ice Age Europe. They can reproduce the same technical quality, but only after years of practice. Some of the blades are as sharp as a modern surgeon's scalpel.
It's an advantage to specialise because specialisation allows the minimisation of effort and the maximisation of gain. It makes perfect sense to pool expertise, to pool resources. It doesn't make sense for all individuals to do the same thing every day. Can we stop now? I've already cut myself twice. Well, it may be very obvious to us that society is specialised because we are a very specialised society, but this is the period in which this specialisation is emerging.
Aki and Braun have no specialist skills to offer to this community. They've been assigned to a production line, systematically scavenging a mammoth which has died near the settlement. The hide will be used for warmth, the bones for building, and the flesh for meat. In time, Aki and Braun will be expected to learn a craft, but for now, they're fit only for general laboring work. While the men are scavenging, Mara is out hunting. Although she's pregnant, she's still expected to work as a beater, fleshing out animals. The image of prehistoric man, the great hunter, is misleading. Once our ancestors began hunting with nets, women were just as likely to be the providers of meat as men. But women could only go hunting if others looked after their children. Archaeologists call this the grandparent revolution. Any community looking to increase the efficiency of its workforce needs to have specialists caring for its children. Aki and Braun have spent their adult years providing for their women and children. Now, the women are providing for them.
Ka vignete kinyan.
Begin Zabosh Hidi.
Mara is finding it much easier to adjust.
Aki! Aki! Shetel! Vinigayot!
Ka!
Ka!
Begins Gayot. Givi.
Nefni.
Begin Zamoj. Oko before Jan.
If they're going to stay in this settlement, they'll all have to come to terms with this new way of life. The first storm of the winter has arrived in Moravia. It's only October, but it's already 20 below. Hunting's impossible in these conditions, so the community draws on its stockpiles of food. They have freezer pits full of meat which was stored earlier in the year. But good planning doesn't solve all their problems. People are being forced to spend long periods of time in confined spaces. Inevitably, tensions surface.
Entra akra tun pingen kantekan.
Fik ping tu fan. Geliti.
Wegen Enga. Zunitan Zikingan.
Even though there's enough food to go around, there's still resentment of Bron and Aki, unskilled outsiders enjoying the fruits of the community's labors. Large societies need ways of diffusing tension. Anthropologists believe that that's the function of a ritual, to remind people of their shared beliefs. Within this community, every adult's face is tattooed. The markings are a permanent badge of identity. If the newcomers want to be accepted as equals, they'll also need tattoos. These aren't the first people to decorate their bodies, but what's unusual is the way it's become part of a ceremony which gives them a sense of all belonging to something that stretches beyond their physical world. This cave and others like it are the best evidence that ritual played an important part in Ice Age life. They weren't lived in by people, but used as sacred places, somewhere to gather and summon up the spirits. And the paintings that adorn the walls were like religious icons.
The paintings that we see on the rock face are not images for the sake of creating images. They're not just straightforward representations of the real world. It's not art for art's sake. These are images that are trying to communicate ideas about the spirit world for people who are not experiencing the spirit world for themselves firsthand. The paintings formed a backdrop, a permanent backdrop. They were there on the rocks around them. They were probably some prop associated with the ritual experiences that people were having at that time. Those rituals would have involved certain symbolic functions such as controlling game, controlling the rain, curing social and biological illnesses. I think as soon as we know that these people are making paintings, I think we can say that ritual would have been important for them. Many of the paintings that we find are actually deep down tunnels that take hours to get to. So the physical experience of going down the caves, we think would have been part of the ritual experience of visiting the spirit world.
Significantly, most of the examples of European cave art have been dated to the height of the last glacial period. As the climate got worse, people painted more, and the need for ritual seems to have grown. The combination of art, music, and spirituality would have been designed to impress an audience. Just as it is today, religion was a way of binding groups close together. Mara and Aki have both allowed themselves to be tattooed. They can see a future for themselves and their unborn child in this community. But Bron was once a chief, admired for his strength. He can't bring himself to become just a small part of this large community. He's already thinking the unthinkable, moving on again after the winter. While the ritual is taking place, the food supplies of the camp have been left unattended. Now they are being raided. The attackers are the same hunters who chased away Bron, Aki, and Mara 2 months previously. Unable to stockpile enough food for themselves, they have resorted to stealing from others. Bron raises the alarm. But it's Aki who goes to the defense of his new community. The raiders have been driven off, but at great cost. Aki has been badly injured and is bleeding heavily. Although Aki had only just been initiated into the community, he died in its name and is honored accordingly.
Digit ved, so dessen kaj. So dessen kaj nanya! Tonde usvet finger. Galenet, dinget.
Once again, a ritual serves to bring the community together. But this time, Bron is among them. He's abandoned all thoughts of leaving and has had himself tattooed. he now accepts that his future lies here, with this new community and its new values. Four months later, Mara goes into labor. It's been a year since she and the others set out across Europe. A year in which she has completely changed her way of life and become part of a settled, permanent community. Her son won't have to make the same transition. He'll grow up knowing no other way of life. The legacy of our Ice Age ancestors is all around us. Physically, our world has changed beyond recognition. But fundamentally, we are still the same people. 24,000 years ago might seem like the dim and distant past, but in reality, it is no more than 1,000 generations. Recently, geneticists have shown that nearly 2/3 of America's diverse population can directly trace their descent to people living at the height of the last glaciation in Europe. Our flesh and blood itself directly descends from those Ice Age hunters and gatherers.
We can look back at those communities living in Ice Age Europe, and they really look as if they're bubbling with creative energy. We can see the artworks and the architecture and the tools they were making and how they're managing to survive in those harsh conditions. And it's as if they were setting the stage for the later cultural development. They were solving the problems of living in one space all year round. And to do that, they had to divide up their villages into areas where different activities took place. And people had to take on different roles in their society. And in essence, it's no different to what we do today. Our world is simply larger, it's busier, it's more complex. But it's not different in kind to those initial settlements in Ice Age Europe.
The world started getting warmer about 20,000 years ago. The Earth's orbit took one of its periodic wobbles, and we moved a little closer to the sun, enough for temperatures to increase and the ice sheets to start melting back to the poles. They left behind vast tracts of fertile land, ripe for human colonization.
We know that as soon as the ice began to melt, as soon as the climate began to thaw, with extraordinary rapidity, people had crossed into brand new landscapes. Some of which their ancestors several generations ago had lived in, but other landscapes, such as colonizing the Americas, were completely new, with completely new ranges of animals and completely new types of landscapes. And people literally sort of charged into them. It's one of the most remarkable feats of our human past. It was as if there had been a build-up of this creative energy and it had been hemmed in by the ice. And then, very rapidly, people could go and explore the world and fill up every single corner of the planet.
The last 10,000 years have been one of the warmest and most stable periods in our planet's history. And in that time, human civilization has flourished. We've built a highly specialized, urbanized world. But one day, all of this will change. One day, the ice will return. For 2.5 million years, the ice sheets have been pulsing back and forth. Their next advance is already overdue. When they return, our planet will become much colder, drier, and more volatile than it is today. Once again, humanity will face a struggle against the climate. And yet somewhere, hardwired into each one of us, is the experience of Ice Age survival. We are all children of the ice.